For the property committee. And just wanted to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is the third in a series of conversations that we've started having at Marion Meeting. So it's in support of our preservation capital campaign. So, you know, a lot of people think that just because an older building is still standing, that it will always still be standing. But actually, it doesn't really work that way. It takes a lot of work and a lot of preservation efforts to keep older structures up and in good condition. And at Marion Friends Meeting, we've been doing that for 326 years. So the Marion Meeting House construction began in 1695, but the meeting was founded in 1682, and the burial yard dates back to 1682. So with the meeting house, the construction began in 1695, but it wasn't completed until 1715 because all the Quakers at the time had full-time jobs, farmers, and they did this in their free time. We also have an 1804 caretaker's house and a 1950 activities building, and then the horse sheds date from the early 1800s. So we're embarking on a preservation, a sort of structural survey and a preservation plan for the entire campus, so that we can get an idea of what exactly needs to be done to preserve it. I don't know, maybe some of you saw that our wall collapsed on Montgomery Avenue a few years ago, and we ended up having to spend $120,000 repairing it in an emergency repair program. So what we want to do is to try to find a way to find out all of the problems that we have and address them before things collapse and things fall down. And speaking of our caretaker's house, I just want to put the word out to everyone who's with us today that we are in the job search for a new caretaker. So if anybody knows anyone, young couples are often who end up with a job like this, but it's a free living in an 1804 historic house with 4 bedrooms, and the responsibility to care for the meeting house and all the buildings and mowing the lawn, shoveling the snow, all of the regular caretaking activities that would be involved with taking care of a historic campus like ours. We are really fortunate today to have Dennis Montagna as our speaker. So Dennis is, oops, where did my, one second. Dennis is the director of the National Park Service's Monument Research and Preservation Program. And he's a neighbor. He lives right across the street in Narberth. And I've known Dennis for many years, and this just seemed like a perfect fit with our continuing lecture series. So Dennis, he's based in the Park Service's Northeast Regional Office in Philadelphia, and the program that he leads provides comprehensive assistance in the interpretation and care of historic cemeteries, outdoor sculpture, and public monuments throughout the nation. And he holds a PhD in art history from the University of Delaware. And he has completed his ICCROM Architectural Conservation course in Rome. And he's a former chair of the American Institute for Conservation's Architectural Specialty Group. And he currently serves as president of the Association for Gravestone Studies. In 2018, he was a recipient of the organization's Harriet Merrifield Forbes Award for outstanding contribution to the field of gravestone studies. Really, I couldn't imagine a more perfect speaker talking about our very, very modest burial yard. So thank you for joining us, Dennis, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Ross, and thank you, Scott. Thank you both for inviting me. I enjoyed sort of getting to know the burial ground better during the course of looking at this. I don't by any means know as much about it as many people who are on this call, but I wanted to just, I guess, look at this talk as a way of virtually being able to stroll around the cemetery with you all. And so I've tried to kind of keep that as the organizing principle of it. I know we have a number of people who are local, but I think there are probably also a number of people who aren't. So I thought it would be good to really start with getting a little bit of a sense of the lay of the land. You can see indicated on the map where the Marion Friends meeting is. It's at the juncture of Meeting House Lane and Montgomery Avenue in Lower Marion Township. The cemetery, you can see the foliage, the trees. The cemetery stretches along Meeting House Lane quite a good distance, really. The cemetery and the meeting house and its attendant structures, the horse barns, you can see them in the two of them in the lower part, the sort of wedge shaped, and then there's another horse shed along Meeting House Lane. It's a fairly large complex, and as Ross was saying, these are all very important parts, and the preservation effort that they've undertaken is really, really commendable. It's a very important site. It's the meeting house and its attendant properties became a National Historic Landmark in 1997. This is the highest designation, the highest honor that the federal government gives an historic property. I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but Marion Meeting has always been one of my really favorite NHLs. And we have quite a few within the Northeast region. Our office oversees the NHL program for the region. So let's go ahead and then sort of look. And I just wanted to basic sketch out briefly what I want to do with you all today, beginning with walking around the burial ground and looking at the grave marker forms and stone types. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the condition of the markers. So that's where the preservation, the conservation end of it comes in. And then talking about once we've considered the condition, what goes into putting a preservation plan together for a cemetery research, and what kind of treatment measures seem to be called for. And then I'm going to close with a look at nearby Quaker burying grounds, mostly because I just got really curious after spending quite a bit of time in yours. I got curious about what are other Quaker burying grounds in the area like, and so I visited a couple. So I'll show you some slides from those. So I want to begin with telling you about a resource which is very valuable. And it's a kind of resource that not many people have when they're trying to do research on their own burial spaces. Published on the Lower Marion Historical Society website is an alphabetized burial record. And you see the URL address, lowermarionhistory.org/burial/Marion. And again, with this talk, I'm not delving into the history of the people buried here. If that's not the level, that's not really what my charge really is. But that material, that beginning material, the research material is there for anyone who wants to go about looking. And I did go down a couple of rabbit holes because I just, I have to, but anyway, this is a great resource. And the reason that you have this resource is because of Mary Wood. And Mary was the archivist at the meeting. She served on the board of the Lower Marion Historical Society. When I was on the board, Mary and I served together. And she's the reason that all of this material has been pulled together. And she was transcribing Price diaries. She was organizing all the records. So the fact that we can do explorations online into this particular burial ground is because of Mary Wood. And for that reason, I want to dedicate this talk. Okay, so if we look kind of quickly, say we stand at one end of the burial ground and we look across, we tend to think that we're seeing sort of the same marker over and over again. Very low, very, very modest, these very kind of gently arched top stones. And that's true to a large extent, but when you look more closely, you see a lot of variety. And that's what began to strike me as I was walking around and trying to get a sense of what this particular burial space is like. The main format that you see is this, like the Hannah Zell marker on the left-hand side, where you would typically have the name of the person is carved into the top face of the stone, And usually there's birth and death dates, birth and death information carved into the side of the stone. And the thing to me that's really interesting to me about this cemetery too is that you have a cemetery that has been burying people for, as Ross said, well over 300 years. We don't have grave markers from all that period. I mean, a lot of them had been unmarked graves. We estimate that there are at least 2,000 graves on this site. But the thing that I was struck by was looking at how people would refer back in modern monuments to see the David Howe Morse marker, which was only created a few years ago. Looking back to the earlier stones, and mostly by early, I mean the mid 19th century stones, because that is what we mostly have. Looking back to those earlier stones for design cues, for points of reference. And it struck me that that's kind of what a community is all about. I mean, you're very much aware of yourself within a much larger continuum. And so you can see that the David Howe, it's a thicker stone. It's also marble. And rather than having the name cut across the top, all of the text is placed on and up and down on a vertical face of the monument. And you can see that there's in the more modern monuments, we get less information. On the older ones, we have born the second month, 19th, so February 19th, and then died the fourth month, 27th, 1873. And even on markers, later markers, this one's from 1890, they're still working with that sort of gently curved form. In this case, this is a granite marker. So going to a different material, and all of the information is cut on that skyward facing surface on this particular monument. We have changes of materials. Marble was the real stone of choice throughout most of the 19th century. By the 1880s and 1890s, you really see granite coming on as a stone of choice, and you can really see that happening in the Marion Meeting burial space as well. And that has really carried on. Here's a granite marker from 2006 that has had a lot of, I would say, sort of additional memorial attention in terms of bulbs being planted. There's a reference to a service, Howard Hoffman's service in World War II. People have left stones and other objects. So you can see that this is a very actively visited site as well. But they worked within that same very modest stone format and picking up on that soft arch top. There's also some variations in that. The Sabian marker, which is a granite marker from 1991, and then the Thomas Elwood Zell marker. It has that sloped surface, but it's canted. So actually it slopes forward. So it isn't flat across the top. And so the Zell marker was put up in 1905. And it's there, once something is on the landscape, it's there to become a point of reference for anybody later on who might want to refer to it and maybe take design cues. And I think that the Sabian monument, Sabian marker is one of those. Very unusual to have something other than birth and death information on these. And I noticed that this one has a founder of the Loyal Legion written in the front. So I, of course, then looked up the Loyal Legion. It's the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States, which is abbreviated as MOLUS, but oftentimes it's just called the Loyal Legion. This was an organization that began just at the tail end of the Civil War. And it was begun, I think, in April of 1865, and Zell was one of the original founders of it. Zell had been a lieutenant colonel, was one of 3 founding members, and these had all been soldiers who had accompanied Lincoln's casket on that train trip out to Springfield, Illinois for his burial. And they formed this organization of officers, Union officers, and the organization still continues today. There are just descendants of officers that are members of it today. And on a number of these too, like with the one I showed you a minute ago, there's sort of secondary or additional commemoration, usually related to military service. So on the right-hand side, we have 2 references to Revolutionary War era soldiers. The little bronze plaque that's flush mounted on the ground on the right-hand side was put up by the Daughters of the American Revolution. The William Whitaker monument on the left has a World War II marker, bronze marker, and a flag, and on the front of his stone, it also notes where he served and what his service in World War II had been. So you do have some personalization and some references to work on some of these, but not very many. You have very idiosyncratic monuments. I've never seen one quite like this particular one before. It's a 4-part stone. It's all one piece of stone, but there are four sections. And along the front, it said sons of, and then then it says Dr. Joseph and Sarah Brookfield. And then each of the names of the sons are cut on the skyward facing surface of each of those stones. So you have from left to right, William, Hunter Irwin, Charles Ellis, and Joseph. And there wasn't a date, there was no inscriptions, there was no date material, but in looking at the online source, it seems as if this probably dates to around 1830 or so. It could be any, sort of mid-19th century. But it's a very interesting memorial and one that you don't typically see. Something else that's fairly unusual, maybe it wasn't always unusual, but it is now, is this row of monuments. This is near the entrance to the cemetery. You can see the meeting house in the background there. This row has footstones. They have both headstones and footstones. These may have been added later. They may have been preserved. Again, I don't know the specific story, but there's a good chance that a lot of the other monuments may have had footstones too. And this really defines the sort of the extremities of the body, the head and the foot. These tend to be very fragile in a way, and a lot of times in order to facilitate mowing and other kind of grounds maintenance, sometimes these are actually harvested up. Other times, being small, they sort of sink below the ground. So there may well be footstones in other locations that are no longer visible. Another type of marker, these flush mounted markers. This one is from 1906. It's a marble marker. You don't see a lot of these at Marion Meeting, but there are some, and you begin to see them around 1900. It's since then become a very popular form, especially in mid-20th century cemeteries that were really designed around monuments that are entirely flush mounted with the ground, that don't have any memorials sticking up. So, but we do see some of these. And again, this is really coming out of a tradition, I think, of looking for forms that are going to sort of lie really gently on the landscape, that are not memorials that are going to call a tremendous amount of attention to themselves. They're going to commemorate a person, but not really go too much beyond that. There are some other memorial types, and the one you see on the left, I put name here because I couldn't read it. But this is a marble. I could read the date. There was a death date of 1789. This is what this one is a variant, or a handful of these in the cemetery, and they're much more typical what we would consider sort of a colonial era stone that have this sort of a crest and a circular element on the top, and then these sort of shoulders on the sides. It's a very typical cemetery form. We find them throughout New England, the mid-Atlantic states as well. And there are some of those. And when I mentioned before, once you have something sitting in the landscape, it's there to be used or to be referred to later on. And the Sykes family markers are, I think, a really clear indication of this. They're unlike the marble one on the left, these are all granite. The first one was put up in 1929 to the son who died then, and then later on, the father passed in 1942, and his wife in 1961. And they all are these three identical granite markers all lined up, but they seem to be providing a really clear reference to colonial gravestones in general, but I think probably the colonial stones that you have here at Marion Meeting in particular. Some of the most recent memorials that we have, the Isabella W. Watt marker, which is granite in 2018. And we see them within the last several years. We have, again, playing off that same gently sloped arch form. They tend to be beefier. I mean, so they're much more substantial than the earlier ones. They typically have all the information on the front of the stone. Some of them are in marble, other ones are in granite. And the Byron Coles, most of the granite ones are actually a fairly light tone granite. They're either kind of a white granite or a light gray. This particular one is a pink granite, I believe. It's actually a Salisbury pink. I think this is a granite that's quarried down in North Carolina. It's really quite a beautiful pink stone. I don't know the specifics, but I'm thinking that there may be another person who's going to be buried at this site. The fact that the inscription rides as low on the face of this monument as it does makes me feel that there may be an additional inscription that is going to be put above it at some point. I remember Ross had mentioned that I think it's only cremated remains that are now interred at the cemetery, and so it's pretty easy to have more than one person buried in a space that would have been only big enough for a single body. So right now I'm going to move into the sort of condition assessment part of the talk, and I thought the John George marker, which is a marble stone from 1887, is a good way to begin. The only way I know this was the John George marker is because I looked at the top of the stone really, really closely. You could barely read John George anymore. You can still read the inscription somewhat on the side, but this is really indicative of what has happened to marble monuments from the 19th century and early 20th century in our particular atmospheric environment. Marble has not done really well, and I think that could be one of the reasons why I know in general it's a reason why people shifted from marble to granite, because granite is not a stone that is susceptible to the kind of sort of aggressive sulfur pollution that we've had historically. It's not like it was at one time, but the Philadelphia area was a very intense manufacturing area, and the marbles have really suffered accordingly. Just thought I would show you this map. This was a map was put together from acid rainfall events, from findings, I think during the mid to late 1980s, when the government was doing a very big acid rain research project. And you can see that the lower pHs, so the areas in orange, are the more acidic environments. The higher pHs are more alkaline. So the stones that are really adversely affected by acid rain would be your calcium-based stones like limestone, marble. Those guys. Some sandstones are adversely affected, but your stones like granite, brick isn't affected really by an acidic environment. Slate. So the reasons those New England slate monuments that you see up in Massachusetts look as crisp as when they were first carved is because they're not a stone type that is affected by acid rain. So you can see where we are in eastern Pennsylvania. It's a pretty hot zone. Also, too, one of the factors is how close you are to pollutants like automobile exhaust. Now, since the Clean Air Act, things have gotten a lot better, and marble monuments that are put up now are not going to be going away as quickly as the ones that we saw being really severely deteriorated during the 19th century. On the map, I've put a little blue star above Virginia City, Nevada, because I wanted to show you something from there. We did a cemetery preservation workshop out in Virginia City a number of years ago. And these are all people from Nevada, from Northern California. And, these are the marble monuments that they have. And here's a monument from the 1890s made out of marble. This thing was still smooth to the touch, and you could still see chisel marks. But these are just how they're used to seeing their marbles. And I try to explain to them that these are really remarkable stones, and that if I took this monument and brought it east to Philadelphia, people would pay money just to be able to run their hand across it, because we just don't have marble monuments that have survived this way. But this is the way marble monuments would have looked when they were first cut, providing, and if they had been able to somehow stay in an environment that was very clean and was also very, very dry. So, all right, so in terms of considering preservation, and this is sort of by no means a comprehensive assessment, but I just thought, but just as sort of a first glimpse, I just want to talk a little bit about preservation, ways of thinking about it, and how you might want to consider moving forward with it. And I'm showing you, this is a whole row. These are relatively modern monuments done between the 1990s. These are all marbles in the foreground, and then within the last few years. In terms of thinking about how to do preservation, planning is really, really key. And so I've listed these 4 aspects that I'll just take you through, beginning with mapping the cemetery. And fortunately, you guys already have a map, so that's good. So you've got something to really build upon. The next thing is conducting a condition assessment of the stones, and I would argue, and of the landscape elements as well. From that condition assessment, you would then determine a scope of treatment. And then once treatments have been carried out, you're going to document treatment so that you have a record of everything. So this complete record all the way through the process. And what you see there is two students. This was a workshop we gave in Windsor, Vermont, about 2 years ago. And you see them, recording information in preserving this. That's a gravestone that's tipped forward that you see in the foreground. Now, this is a sample. I mean, there are a number of different kinds of survey forms you can use. This is a sample of one of them, and this takes you through the inventory and condition assessment on the left form. You can see where at the lower half it says marker condition, and it has places to be able to enter all the information that you're seeing, a place to enter a photograph. They're also writing down the inscription. So even in and of itself, this is a valuable document because you're capturing information that may not be there forever. Being able to capture the inscription. We actually did a workshop down in Atlanta a number of years ago, and one of the beginning talks was by the guy who was then in his 90s, and he was the historian for the city of Atlanta. And he said that when he looked back on his long career, the thing that he was most proud of was in the 1920s, he was part of a team that went through and recorded inscriptions. And he said many of the stones whose inscriptions he recorded don't even exist anymore, and they only know them by the record that was made of them. On the image on the right is a treatment form. And so you can see that monument that was inventoried was then removed from the ground because it had sunk quite a bit down. It was removed, was photographed when it was out, and then the whole treatment, it was all described. Everything that was done to it was recorded, so that in the future, you know exactly what was done to it, and you know exactly when it was done. And I'd say this is the kind of record that needs to live in several different places. The meeting needs to have it. I would say Lower Merion Historical Society should have a copy of it as well. You don't want it only to exist in one location. Now then there is also additional questions that you might ask. And one of them is, are there unmarked graves? And I think we can most definitely say yes, there are. Burials began happening there as Ross had mentioned, in the 1680s. So there are a tremendous number of graves that aren't marked. And you can, and then in the next slide, this is actually a very interesting one. This was a map. The lower section is a map that was compiled of the site, as well as an inventory of grave markers. You see those big gaps in there. There's most likely burials there as well. But there are not monuments. So it would be interesting to know, not critical to know, but it would be interesting to know what what other burials you may have there. And there are a couple of ways of doing that. One of them that's commonly used is ground penetrating radar, and otherwise known as GPR. And what it is, it's almost like it looks like a lawnmower somewhat, and it's a way of using sound waves to then be able to read what's going on underground, and the what it spits out, like the graph that it spits out, you can see down below. And it takes some time to be able to know how to read these. You don't always get the information that you want, but oftentimes you will. And you can see on this one, it has where old burials are, and then some other burials that are probably more recent burials. There's another low-tech way in which you can also get information. This is by dowsing, also called witching or divining. GPR is very expensive. Dowsing is not. You can actually get these little dowsing rods. You can order them online for about $15, I guess. And you know, I've actually seen this work. I have a colleague who's very, very good at it. I've tried it. I'm not as good at it, but I got better at it over time. You almost have to kind of relax into it. And he's able to actually find. We were using this at the Gladwin Jewish Cemetery that's being worked on, and there's a lot of conservation going on out there. And dowsing has actually been able to show us where there are burials that are not marked. Additional questions also include: are there buried grave markers? And say there's probably a good chance that there are. And the method that we use, the sort of low-tech method, is to take this is a metal rod that has a sort of a soft edge, and then it has a rubber-coated handle. And you basically just very gently are probing down. You know, you're not going very far, maybe a foot down, 8 inches down, just to see whether or not there may be stones that have slipped underground. And we use this a lot when we're doing cemetery preservation, because a lot of times we're dealing with broken stones, and usually there are pieces of broken stone underground, and we try to really make sure we're finding everything before we try to put things back together again. So I think, just as a first blush, I think one of the things that you may be looking at in terms of preservation treatments would be the raising and resetting of some stones. One of your really early markers, it's dated 1785. It's a field stone, so it's a local stone marker that's fairly close to the entrance to the cemetery. You can see on the top left. So it says 17, the half of the date's covered up, so you know there's quite a bit of stone underneath. So that would be a candidate to probably raise. You could read the entire inscription. The one below it as well has sunk, and it's tipped forward. The row of monuments that you see on the right, a couple of them are really pretty far out of whack. There's a flush mounted one in the bottom right, which is almost gone. I mean, it's beginning to sink, and at some point within a certain number of years, unless it's raised, you're not going to be seeing it. It's going to be down there somewhere. Now, you have much better news than most other people who are doing cemetery preservation, because most other cemetery raising and resetting projects involve a lot of equipment. This is a tripod on the left for hoisting stone. This is a 3-part monument, so if it's leaning or if it's fallen over, you have to take the whole thing apart. You have to level it, and then you reassemble it. For even bigger monuments, we're using these gantries that have pulleys, so you can move the stone back and forth. You can see that has a 4,000-pound capacity. You're dealing with much smaller stones, and these really can be done without that kind of equipment. Here's a couple of projects that look very much like yours. This is a training on the left, a training course we did up in Mount Vernon, New York, of resetting. So basically, you're freeing the stone, you're leveling it, and if it needs better drainage, there's stones that are put down there, and then there is dirt that is put in and then tamped down. On the right-hand slide, actually, it's kind of interesting when you can see how this stone, it had broken off at some point. You can see that jagged edge, but also you can see where the ground level was. You can see that tide line. So before it was reset, that stone was really lying sideways. So now this is the process of lifting it, straightening it, and then setting it back again. But even though you probably won't have to use heavy equipment, you have to be very conscious of the weight of stone. Stone is really heavy, and I've just marked in white the 2 types of stone that you all would be most concerned with: marble and granite, and both of them are averaging around 160 pounds per cubic pound. And those are pretty sizable stones. So you figure a cubic foot of stone is going to be a foot by a foot by a foot. Even your small markers are going to be that and more. So being really careful is important. The other preservation team, the other category of preservation treatment I would suggest would be looking at removing biological soiling. I mean, this is largely an aesthetic issue. You're not really causing harm by having your stones be soiled, and it really is all biological soiling. It's different kinds of algae. In some cases, it's just dirt that's being kicked up when you have a heavy rainstorm. But this is something that you may want to look at cleaning. And you have basically two granite. Those two bottom slides show granite, and then the top is one of your marbles. There really needs to be an evaluation to make sure that a stone is stable enough to be cleaned. A lot of marbles are very fragile, and sometimes you're not going to want to really scrub them. Granite is a much better candidate in terms of not harming them. This is the cleaning method that we would use for biological soiling. And this is a training workshop that was held down in Alabama. So the material that we use is a very mild biocide. It's called D2. It's a quaternary ammonia compound. So it has a soap, so it has a surfactant that then has a biocide added to it. And we use this to clean the stones, and it seems to really hold the biological soiling at bay for a longer period of time. It'll come back eventually, but it keeps it at bay. And you can see what the procedure, the guy on the right hand side that has a pump sprayer. You basically wet down the stone. You then spray it with this D2 solution. You let it sit for a little bit, and you can see the tools that we use. There's a plastic scraper. Sometimes if you have really heavy accretion of lichen or of algae, you would probably scrape it with the plastic scraper first, and then go in with soft natural bristle brushes. Those little skewers, little wooden implements are for cleaning lettering out. So you have like different little tools, different smaller brushes that you can use for doing different things. And then there's a rinsing, then it's rinsed off. And you'll see an improvement immediately, but then over, say, the next couple of weeks, you'll see more of an improvement, because this stuff usually, it works largely by killing off the biological materials. So as they are killed off, you can see the stone will brighten over time. Here's a couple of examples. Here's a marble monument on the left before it was cleaning, and then after it was cleaning. It was cleaned. And then here's a granite one. And the granite ones come up really well. Granite really it's a terrific stone, and you really they come up very well. And you can see it didn't even harm the artificial flowers that were in front. So with looking at your cemetery and thinking about it a little bit, I got really curious about what the lay of the land looks like at other cemeteries. So I went over to the old Haverford Friends Meeting House, very similar in date and in history to yours. They were burying in their burying ground probably in 1684, in that period of time as well. Their meeting house dates to around 1700, just like yours does, and then it got an addition in 1800. It's located on Eagle Road. Unlike your cemetery, this burial space is not immediately adjacent to it. You see on the map where it says Old Haverford Friends Meeting, you go a little further down Eagle Road, and you have the burial ground is on the left-hand side, more at the bottom of my aerial view. And this is a sort of a general view of it. Looks very much like yours in a way, because of the sort of gently arched top monuments. But when you look at it, you'll see some different monument conventions. Here's a cemetery from the same period of time, but there's a little bit of a variation. This particular stone, some of these stones have this kind of a concave curve, right? Concave that runs around it, and you can see that from some of the late 19th century monuments, like the one on the left, and that is then picked up in one of the granite ones from 1962 that memorializes a World War II vet. But you can see there again, so here's a reference to earlier stones and heating within a design protocol that was established earlier. Also, we see a few monuments there that also refer to either people's hobbies or their work. The Henry Roy Myers has a train engine on it. The Peter Sven Westin has a map of the world in the middle of it. So you do have some variations in terms of iconography on these as well. But it's suffering from the same issues that your cemetery is, and that Marion is, because of basically the problems because of the environment. And having names that were cut in the top, I mean, from a preservation standpoint with marble, it's the worst thing, because those names in the top have really been getting the full brunt of the atmospheric degradation. And a lot of these are really hard to read at this point, but you can read the birth and death information on the sides. Some of these, I think, because they're so illegible, people have gone in and put secondary monuments. So they've created in front of them these flush-mounted granite markers that have the names and the information that you really can't read on the marbles anymore. So the memorial still is functioning. It's still serving a memorial purpose by commemorating individuals. In terms of the need to raise and realign and reset, that cemetery, I think, has challenges, or has the need for that at least as much. At one point, this whole line of monuments lined up, but you can see how that has really changed. And so, the protocol for this would be to really basically dig out in front of the monument, and then once you have it free, to be able to stand it up, and then try to get this line back in shape again. Grave markers that are subsiding, and I don't know why there's so much difference between these two side-by-side markers, but but Isaac's wife Elizabeth is about to sink below grade here. And then the last cemetery that I went to look at, I went and looked at Radnor Friends Meeting, which the initial building program was 1717 to 18. And then it had an addition in 1722. So very early in its history. You see a postcard on the right hand, on the left hand side, and then a photograph I took of it when I was there a couple of weeks ago. And here's a map view of that. Like your cemetery, their cemetery is immediately adjacent to the meeting house. And here's a couple of photographs. The one on the left is from the Radnor Historical Society, and the one on the right is one that I shot when I was there. And if you look at some of the early stones, these would be sort of 1870s probably. Fairly small, again, fairly small markers. These are actually taller than a lot of the ones that you have, but these are about the earliest monuments that I saw there. These probably date to about 1830 or 40. And then looking very much like yours, and here's one where you really cannot read the name that's inscribed across the top. This has some lichen also, in addition to algae. And again, as the other cemeteries, we see people playing off of earlier forms. These two modern monuments, this one on the right was only put in within the last couple of years. Marble, the way most of the other ones were marble. And then that same for the really gentle curve at the top. But not everybody did that. And so you have a real variety there as well. There you have quite a few more of these flush mounted markers. And then these are modern markers. These are what we really think of now as minimalist marking. And I think within a Quaker mentality, this worked just fine. I mean, so within the marketplace, there are very subtle markers, and there are sort of ones that don't call too much attention to themselves, but they mark a grave, and they let you know who is there. And at Radnor, I saw more of these flush mounted ones than I saw at the other two burial spaces. And in closing, I thought, well, let me show you one other one. This is Westfield Friends meeting from Cinnaminson, New Jersey. And we did some test cleaning there several years ago. And I pulled this image because this was I got this from their website. There's a school that is adjacent to the burial site and the meeting house, and they were using it for outdoor space. So during the pandemic, kids could come, they could be distant from each other, and they could still conduct classroom activities outside. And I kind of think that the people buried there would think that that was pretty good. I mean, that's a kind of a nice use for space, and that it's space shared between the living and those who have passed. One of the people who passed, who actually was a member of that congregation, is Alice Stokes Paul, and she was sort of the last. She was pretty much the youngest of the suffragists, and she only died in 1977. And her marker was one of the ones that we had cleaned. And so, as part of the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the 19th Amendment last year, people visited and marked Alice's gravesite. So anyway, that's it. So I want to thank you all for being here, and then thank you for zooming around with me. And it'd be interesting to do some more looking, do some more probing, and understanding. I'd like to know more about the trees, about the landscape, and how all of those elements came about too. So that's an investigation for another day, I believe. So anyway, thank you all very much. And if you want to take a few questions and discussion, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, there are a couple questions that have come in. One is so I noticed no mention of cement, mortar, or concrete. Are the stones just set directly on the earth and there's no other foundation?
Yes, I think they probably are. I mean, I think there's a good chance that they extend down below grade to some extent because you want to have them anchor, but I think it's the earth that anchors them. So when it was originally set, that would have been the case. And when you reset them, that's why it's so important to be really tamping earth around it to make it a real solid, because you want to make sure the earth keys them in, but you don't want to be setting them in concrete. That's going to be really bad for the stone. People have done that and they've really caused more harm in terms of the marble will start breaking apart. There's just really no need for it. And also too, you want to think about, you won't be the last people working on these. So you want to make sure that you're preserving as many preservation options for the future. And if you're setting things in concrete, then someone has something that's heavy and it's even heavier, because then you have to be maneuvering that whole thing around. So we really try to use whatever systems were used from an historic standpoint. Your monuments are all single stones in the ground, so it's not like the ones that are built up with different sections where you actually would be using mortar in them. And the historical marble monuments, you would use mortar in between. You'd use spacers so the mortar doesn't all press out, but they would be pointed. There would be like a mortar joint that would be finished. The modern granite markers, when they're stacked, there are more modern setting compounds that are used for the granite ones, but you're really using a high lime, a very soft mortar on those. But you don't have two-part monuments. All of yours are just single stones.
So there was another question here, and I noticed this as well. The question is, what happened to the early markers, and have they sunk? Because when you showed the aerial view of our burying ground, there are markers that are closer to the meeting house, and then there's that large space where there seem to be no markers, and then they start again. I think you said we can safely assume that there are people buried in that space.
Yeah.
Is it conceivable that the markers just have sunk all the way down, or that they didn't have markers?
You've just enunciated both options.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. Scott, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think a lot of them never had markers. And again, I'm not a a Quaker historian, but I think that from what I've read, you really didn't have a lot of marked graves before the middle of the 19th century, and that may vary from meeting to meeting, but I think a lot of the early burials didn't have those early, the ones from say 1680s up through say the 1750s, 1780s. You probably don't. I mean, you do have some that are from the 1780s, but not everybody was marking graves, and there are different feelings about it. I think, and maybe at some point, it's entirely possible that things were consciously buried, that there may have been markers that were consciously buried from time to time, depending on what the meeting felt was an appropriate thing. So
there's a couple of comments that have come in that said that at various times Quakers banned markers. Early Quakers did not like marked graves, so that certainly could explain a lot of it.
Yeah.
I want to a few more questions keep coming in. I want to make sure we get all these covered. The next question is, can you clean biological shining on markers using certain microbes, as described recently for the Medici tombs in Florence, Italy?
Well, those are, I'm not sure. I mean, those are the Medici tombs have been indoors, so they're an indoor. That's really, you're looking at more of a museum conservation effort for those. You're in a very controlled environment, and I'm pretty sure they are using different kinds of things. We really, I mean, with these, we're really looking at, these are outdoor, and there are particular methods that we've used. We really try to keep people from doing really aggressive cleaning. We've seen a lot of, in the past, sandblasting. We've seen a lot of pressure washing. Sometimes people will go with pressure washers, especially with the marbles. You can do a tremendous amount of damage. So, we're always trying to advocate for these like minimal methods. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what kind of microbes that discussion is about, but this really does. It's a soap, but that it does have this this sort of anti-biota substance that does work by sort of killing off the biological. But I don't think with the Medici tombs, I don't think it's biological material that's being cleaned, probably.
So this next question sort of, I guess, is somewhat similar in that, is there so you had these markers that are damaged and they're difficult to read, and in some cases you had noticed that the names have been just eliminated because of the environmental damage. But is there a preferred method to restoring those faded or illegible markings on the headstones, or even to be able to sort of read them better or have a better record?
Yeah, one of the things that we do it's really works quite well is we'll take photographs using raking light. So you're going to get your best view by having light that comes sort of across the surface, and you can do that either with a light source, or we use actually mirrors. You can use like a tall mirror and then angle, because a lot of times the sun won't be in the right place, and you can angle sun across the face, and you can read. Many times you can read stones that you really can't read any other way by doing that. In terms of like things like recutting, we don't advocate recutting. I mean, these are the monuments that have come down to us. I think putting a secondary marker that has that information is good. But I think in terms of being able to read them and capture the information, because basically these stones, the marbles, they're marble is doing what it wants to do, which is to go back to being a bunch of minerals, and so that's kind of what it is. So we usually try to not create kind of a false historical appearance, and you can do a lot of damage by trying to recut these, and they just kind of look weird. I mean, they're neither fish nor fowl. You don't really have an historic stone anymore, but you don't have a new stone either. So we just really try to capture the information as much as we can.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to do two more questions. You'd mentioned there's a form that is used to document conditions. Are those forms online? Are they available?
There are a zillion of these forms around, and they've been, usually anybody who does a project sort of takes a general form and then modifies it to whatever their particular need is. So yeah, there are a number of these. I can supply you with some of these inventory forms.
Great.
That would be, that way you can sort of modify them to what you need. I mean, I think the one that I showed was really pretty good, but it's designed to capture monuments that are more complex than what yours are. But no, that's absolutely doable. It's a very important part of it. That's the problem. A lot of times people they want to do something. They want to do conservation. They want to do preservation, and so sometimes there's a real rush to start treating, but it's really that planning piece that's really important in that sort of, because that's where you decide what choices you want to make in terms of cleaning. And there are many different choices. I mean, it's not an obvious choice many times.
So the last question is, and this could be just a brief answer to make some recommendations, but given your experience and breadth of knowledge in our region in the Mid-Atlantic here, are there other monuments or other things that are perhaps overlooked that may be worth seeing?
What you want what my favorite cemeteries are?
Sure.
I like big sweeping massive cemeteries as well. I mean, I like subtle ones too. But Laurel Hill and West Laurel Hill Cemetery are two of the nation's great burial spaces. Lately, we've been really involved with Jewish cemeteries in the area. There's the Gladwin Jewish Cemetery, which had been an abandoned cemetery for many years, and Beth David has taken it on. This is a cemetery that was begun in the 1890s. Mostly Jews from South Philadelphia, from around 4th Street, the people coming out of the fabric trades. And it was abandoned for many years, and the synagogue took it on. No connection with the synagogue. They just took it on as a project. And so there's been preservation going on out there, and that's a particularly exciting one. We've done also a lot of work with Jewish cemeteries in Philadelphia that had been vandalized back about 4 years ago. So I mean, I'm kind of interested in the cemeteries that have pretty complicated preservation issues too, and those really do, because whereas your monuments are very small and very, calm and spaced apart. In many of the Jewish cemeteries of the late 19th, early 20th century, monuments are large and they're chock-a-block together, right. And it creates some very complicated preservation. But I mean, I like any cemetery I go to. I never go to a cemetery in which at some point I don't say, gee, I've never seen that before. There's always something different. There's always some monument type or convention or something that is new. It's as you might gather, it's a source of constant interest to me, right?
Fascinating. Well, we are very fortunate to have this jewel in the middle of Lower Merion here. So Dennis, I'm going to turn this over to Ross in just a second, but I cannot thank you enough. This has just been a wonderful session, informative, and thank you. And Ross, I'll turn it over to you to sort of wrap things up.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. And thank you so much, Dennis. Wow, what a great talk. I have one follow-up question, probably not apropos of Marion, but often in late 19th, mid 19th century stones, I'll see a period after the name. Is that the definitive end of life, or what is the meaning of that?
I've seen it described that way, and I've people have talked about that, and that apparently it is used in that way as a definitive end. I noticed that on that 4-part marker, the four sons of, at the inscription that's on the front, there's a period at the end of that also. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I have heard it described that way. I don't know what I can't say for sure, but I have heard that it carries that symbolic meaning. Yeah.
Oh, Thank you. And thank you again for such an informative talk. So now it's up to us to get a committee together and start putting some of your suggestions into practice. So
oh no, I've given rise to a committee. That's great. No, it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed doing this, and it was you know, the ideal thing would be to be walking around the cemetery and chatting with you all there, but you know, we had too many people to be doing that anyway. So I tried to do the next best thing, which is to try to virtually walk you around. So
great. Well, thank you, Dennis.
sure.
And thank you everyone for joining us. So I will ask you to please support our preservation program. We have a goal of $80,000. We received a $25,000 Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission grant for a planning project. And we've raised $23,000 in addition to that. So we still have about $36,000 more to go. So we have a number of other ways that we're trying to raise money, but every little bit helps. So if you go to marionfriends.org, there's a contribute here button. I hope you will go and visit and contribute often. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Scott, for your help. And on behalf of Marion Friends Meeting, I want to invite you to come back to this continuing series of lectures and conversations we're going to be giving every other month. They're part of a Know Thy Neighbor series, and we're going to intermix them with history and also with social issues. So we're working with our member Laura Jackson, and we're going to be getting together a number of social issues also. So keep an eye on our website and for our emails, and we will keep you informed. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great afternoon. Happy 4th of July.